hope you're doing well today, and thank you for joining me again. If you enjoy stories like mine, feel free to like and subscribe. It truly helps me keep sharing these memories. This day sits heavy in my heart, even after all these years, because it was the first time I felt the sharp distance between where I came from and the world he belonged to. Yet, it was also the first time he chose me so openly, without hesitation. I remember waking up early that morning, thinking it would be a normal day, but deep down, my chest carried a nervous flutter because he had asked me to meet him in front of that big cafe downtown. The fancy one with gold handles on the doors that I never had the courage to enter alone. I didn't even know why he wanted to meet there, but I told myself to stay calm, to keep my mask on, the one I wore whenever I stepped into places that reminded me I hadn't grown up with comfort or fine things. When I arrived, he was already there, smiling like the whole world was gentle. And for a moment, I forgot that my shoes were cheap and my coat was borrowed from a cousin. But the moment we walked inside, I could feel eyes turning. I could feel people looking at my clothes, my hands, my hair, like they were trying to measure my worth by every inch of me. And right when I started shrinking inside myself, pretending I didn't hear the soft whispers from a group of girls sitting by the window, whispers about who she must be and why he's with someone like that. He glanced at me for just a second, saw the way my smile was fading, and without saying a word, he reached for my hand. He held it right there in front of everyone, firm and warm, like he was telling them and me that he wasn't ashamed of me, that I belonged beside him even when their eyes said otherwise. Something softened in my chest when he did that, but something else tightened too, because I knew this was only the beginning. I didn't know then how far those whispers would reach, or how many walls I would face just for loving someone from a world bigger and brighter than mine. But in that moment, his hand around mine felt like a promise, a small, quiet shield I desperately needed. And yet, as we walked deeper into that cafe, I sensed we were stepping into a day that would test me in ways I wasn't prepared for. The moment we sat down, I could feel my heartbeat settling, but not because I was calm, more because I was trying to hide how uneasy I felt in a place that smelled like money, old comfort, and generations of people who never had to choose between paying bills or buying bread. The waiter came over with that stiff smile rich places give you when they're trying to decide if you deserve to be there. And even though he greeted both of us, his eyes stayed on the man I loved, almost pretending I wasn't part of the table. I kept my hands in my lap, trying not to touch anything that looked expensive, and I watched as he ordered like it was the easiest thing in the world. When the waiter left, he looked at me and asked if I was okay, but I couldn't tell him the truth, that every time someone glanced our way, it felt like another reminder of how far from this world I had grown up, how many nights I had eaten plain rice, while people here probably threw away better food than we dreamed of. I didn't want him to feel guilty, so I just nodded and told him I was fine, even though my stomach was twisted into tight knots. He reached across the table, fingers brushing mine again, and whispered that I didn't have to pretend with him, but I did anyway, because pretending had kept me safe my whole life. But then the whispers came again, louder this time, drifting from a table behind us, soft giggles mixed with small snickers. I didn't turn around, but I knew they were talking about me because I heard one of them say, "She looks like she works in housekeeping, not like someone who belongs here." My chest felt heavy, like someone had set bricks on top of it, and I lowered my eyes, wishing the ground would open and swallow me before I embarrassed him. But he heard it too. I could see it in his jaw tightening, and the way his hand turned firm around mine. He leaned closer and said quietly, "Don't let them make you small." And for a moment, just a moment, I believed him. But the truth is, years of being poor doesn't leave your bones easily. You carry it with you, the old worries, the old shame, the invisible marks poverty carves into your spirit. Still, something about his voice made me sit a little straighter. When the drinks arrived, the waiter placed his cup gently and mine carelessly, as if the glass didn't matter, as if I didn't matter. He noticed that too, and his eyes flashed with frustration. Though he stayed calm, I wished he hadn't seen it, wished I could hide how much these little things stung. I thought the worst of the day had already passed, but then the group of girls behind us stood up, and as they walked past our table, one of them leaned in just enough for her words to hit like a slap. "He can do better." I froze, heat rushing to my eyes, and for the first time that day, I felt myself breaking. But before I could pull my hand away to hide my shaking, he stood up, gently but firmly, and said something I wasn't ready for, something that would change the whole energy in that cafe. And the moment he spoke, the entire room turned silent. When he stood up, the chair made a soft scraping sound that somehow felt louder than every whisper in that room. And for a second, the entire cafe froze, forks midair. Conversations paused, eyes lifting all at once toward us as if they had been waiting for a scene. I wanted to disappear, but he didn't give me the chance. He looked straight at the girl who had just said he could do better, and in a calm voice that carried more weight than anger ever could, he told her that respect wasn't a luxury. It was basic human decency. And if she couldn't offer that, then she didn't belong in a place that claimed to be refined. His voice didn't shake, not even a little, and that shocked me more than anything, because he wasn't the type to seek attention or confront people. He was gentle, soft-spoken, the kind who avoided trouble. But right then, he wasn't defending just me. He was defending everything I had survived. Every night I had gone to sleep hungry. Every job I had taken to keep my family afloat. Every moment I had felt smaller than the world around me. Still, even with his words filling the room, I could feel the eyes on my clothes, on my hands, on everything that didn't match their perfection. The girl's smirk faded, but she didn't apologize. She just rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath as she walked away, pretending she wasn't shaken. The waiter stepped back nervously, unsure whether to approach or avoid us completely, and that moment stretched out like a thin thread, ready to snap. He slowly sat back down, his hand finding mine again, like he was anchoring both of us. But my heart was pounding so hard, I couldn't even swallow. I kept thinking, why did he do that? Why would he risk embarrassing himself for someone like me? I tried to pull my hand away, not because I didn't want him to hold it, but because I felt unworthy of the way he fought for me. Like his world and mine were pulling in two opposite directions, and he was trying to tie them together with nothing but his bare hands. But he wouldn't let go. Instead, he squeezed tighter and whispered, "I'm not letting anyone talk about you like that." His eyes were soft but fierce, and that scared me in a different way, a deeper way, because I could feel how much he meant it. Suddenly, the waiter returned, voice trembling a little as he asked if we needed anything else. But he wasn't looking at my love this time. He was looking at me. And that shift, even if it was small, almost brought tears to my eyes. We ordered something simple just to get through the awkward moment. But the silence that settled afterward wasn't cold. It was heavy with meaning, with things I wanted to say, but didn't know how to put into words. I stared at the steam rising from my cup, trying to calm the storm inside me, wondering if he understood the price of choosing someone like me in front of people like them. I wondered if he knew that moments like this didn't just sting, they shook me to my core. And right when I opened my mouth to speak, he leaned forward with a look I'd never seen before. A look that told me the day wasn't done testing us yet, because what he was about to tell me would change the direction of everything. He leaned toward me with that steady look, the kind that made my chest tighten, because I could tell he wasn't about to say something small. And before I could ask what was wrong, he told me he had brought me there for a reason bigger than coffee or spending time together. His voice dropped softer, almost worried, and he said his family had been asking questions about me, too many questions, the kind that came wrapped in judgment, wrapped in assumptions, wrapped in that quiet rich people tone that said they wanted to understand me, but really just wanted to confirm I wasn't good enough. I felt my stomach drop, because even though I expected this day to come, hearing it out loud still hit like cold water on my skin. He told me his mother had asked him where I was from, what school I went to, what my parents did. And when he said I didn't come from the same world they did, the room had gone silent in their house, like someone had said a bad word. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was trying to warn me, to prepare me. But it still felt heavy. I looked at him, trying to read whether he was having second thoughts, whether he was getting ready to end something before it got harder. But then he reached out again, brushing my knuckles with his thumb like he always did when he wanted to calm me. And he whispered that he didn't care about any of that he wanted me beside him, no matter what. But before I could feel relief, he told me something that made my heart tighten even more. His sister wanted to meet me. And the way he said meet made it sound less like a simple introduction and more like an inspection, a test I didn't sign up for. He admitted his sister had strong opinions, especially about people entering their family circle. And she had already said something that made him uncomfortable. She told him that girls like me attach themselves to men like him because they want to climb up. Those words felt like claws dragging down my back. I swallowed hard, feeling the cafe walls closing in, because I knew I would be walking into something painful, something sharp-edged and cold. I asked him why he didn't say no, why he didn't tell his sister I wasn't ready. But he looked guilty, and told me he wanted to stand up for me in front of them, to show them who I truly was, not the picture they had made in their minds. Part of me wanted to say yes, to be brave, to show his world I wasn't weak. But another part of me remembered every time I had been looked down on in my life, every door I had walked into where people judged my clothes, my voice, my background. Before I even introduced myself, I stared at the table, my breath stuck in my throat, wondering if I could handle their eyes, their tone, their quiet questions meant to make me feel small. And as he waited for my answer, I realized the day wasn't just testing my confidence. It was testing whether love could survive the weight of two worlds pulling at us. I opened my mouth to reply, but the door of the cafe swung open behind him, and when I looked up, my entire body froze, because the last person I expected to see was walking straight toward our table with a stare sharp enough to cut through the air. His sister had come early. She walked toward us with that slow, confident stride rich girls are born into, the kind that doesn't come from practice, but from knowing the world will always bend for you. And the moment I saw her eyes, cold, sharp, scanning me from head to toe, I felt my breath catch in my throat. She didn't smile, not even politely. Instead, she raised one eyebrow like she was already disappointed, already judging, already convinced I wasn't worth the space I was sitting in. He stood up quickly, surprised to see her, and tried to greet her warmly, but she barely acknowledged him before turning her attention fully on me, her lips pressing into a thin, unimpressed line. I stood too, because staying seated felt like giving her even more power. But the second I rose, she tilted her head just slightly, as if studying a stain on a wall. "So," she said, drawing the word out, "you're the girl my brother has been talking about." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the room like a blade sliding across glass. I forced a small smile, the polite one I learned to use when I didn't know whether to defend myself or stay quiet. But even that felt too small under her stare. She didn't wait for me to answer before stepping closer. So close, I could smell her expensive perfume. The kind you recognize, even if you've never owned anything worth more than a few dollars. She looked over my clothes, my simple purse, my shoes that had faded at the edges. And then she gave a soft laugh, one without joy, one meant to make sure I felt it. "You look different than I expected," she said. And even though her tone pretended to be neutral, her eyes told the real story. He stepped in quickly, irritation rising in his voice as he told her to stop. But she brushed him off with a flick of her hand, keeping her gaze locked on me like she wanted to see whether I would break first. "I just came because Mom and Dad are worried," she continued, still speaking to him, but staring at me. "And I wanted to see with my own eyes what kind of girl has been distracting you." The word girl landed strangely, like she meant child, like she meant someone beneath her. My throat tightened, but I kept my back straight, even though my legs felt unsteady under me. She leaned in just a little, lowering her voice like she wanted only me to hear, and whispered, "You don't belong in our world, you know that, right?" Something inside me flinched, old wounds, old memories, old voices telling me the same things. But before I could swallow the hurt or step back or protect myself, he moved between us, his jaw clenched, his voice shaking now. "That's enough," he said. "You don't get to talk to her like that." But she only looked at him with a slow smirk, the kind that said she believed she had already won, that the gap between their world and mine was too large for his defense to matter. And as the tension thickened around us, she took one last step back, crossed her arms, and said something that would burn itself into my memory forever. "If she stays, you will lose more than you think." Her words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating and sharp. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. And whether I was ready or not, my life was about to change in ways I wasn't prepared for. Her words lingered in the air like a cold shadow, and even though he stood between us, blocking her glare with his body, I could still feel the weight of her threat pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I didn't know what she meant by "lose more than you think," but the way she said it made my stomach twist, like she was holding secrets about their world that I wasn't prepared to face. He turned toward me, his eyes filled with an apology I didn't know how to accept, because none of this was his fault. Yet all of it was happening because of me. I whispered that we should sit down, that maybe we could talk calmly. But before he could answer, his sister stepped closer again, ignoring every bit of tension she had already caused, and slipped her hand through his arm like she was reminding both of us that she knew him better, that she had been part of his life long before I ever entered it. "Let's go," she told him, not even pretending to include me in that sentence. "We need to talk about the family dinner tonight." My heart sank, another reminder that their lives were planned out, coordinated, filled with events I didn't know how to fit into. But he pulled his arm from her grip, gently but firmly, and said he wasn't leaving. "If you have something to say," he told her, "you can say it here." She looked stunned for a moment, maybe because she wasn't used to being challenged publicly, especially not by her own brother. Her eyes flicked around the cafe, noticing the people watching, and she lowered her voice even more, tightening her tone until every word felt like a squeeze around my ribs. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "She is not like us. She doesn't understand our world. She will make your life harder." I felt my face heat, not from shame this time, but from anger slowly building in the pit of my stomach. I wanted to say something, anything, but years of learning when to stay quiet kept me frozen. And then she took it further. She said that once their parents realized he was serious about me, they wouldn't stay silent, and they weren't the type to accept just anyone. Her voice sharpened on that word, anyone, like she was talking about a stray animal he had picked up. But hearing that, something inside me snapped. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, but I finally found my voice. I told her that I didn't need her approval, that I wasn't trying to take anything from their family, and that I wasn't some charity case climbing into their world. The cafe went quiet again at my words, as if everyone had been holding their breath waiting to see whether I would stand up for myself. Her eyes widened, not because she respected me, but because she didn't expect someone like me, someone from the other side, to talk back. Before she could respond, he stepped closer to me, placing his hand on my back gently, like he was both supporting me and shielding me from the look his sister gave. But instead of arguing again, She just shook her head slowly, like she was tired of both of us, like she held the final card, and we just didn't know it yet. "Fine," she said, turning away, "but don't say I didn't warn you." She walked out without another glance, leaving the door swinging behind her, and I stood there trying to breathe, trying to understand why my presence in his life felt like such a threat to hers. He turned to me immediately, asking if I was okay, but all I could think was that his sister wasn't done, not even close. And even though he held my hand again, warm and steady, a quiet fear settled inside me, telling me that today was only the beginning of a storm neither of us was ready for. After she left, the cafe felt different, like the air had shifted, like the warmth from the lights and the soft music couldn't reach me anymore. And even though he kept his hand on my back, steady and reassuring, my mind was racing in 100 directions I couldn't control. I sat down slowly, my legs weak, and he sat beside me instead of across from me, as if he wanted to close every inch of space his sister had tried to wedge between us. People around us pretended to go back to their conversations, but I could still feel their curiosity, the way their eyes drifted toward us every few seconds, hungry for more drama, more cracks, more proof that I didn't belong in a place like that. I wrapped my hands around my cup, even though the drink was already cold, trying to stop the shaking in my fingers. And he kept whispering that he was sorry, that he didn't expect her to show up like that he never wanted me to feel attacked or humiliated. I wished I could tell him it was okay, that I was used to people treating me like I was less. But this felt different. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't a random person passing judgment. This was his family, the people who shaped his world, the people whose acceptance would eventually matter, whether I wanted it to or not. I finally managed to breathe and asked him why his sister was so angry, so threatened, and he hesitated before telling me that she was protective of him and afraid that I would change things. I almost laughed at how ridiculous that sounded me. A girl who grew up counting pennies and praying for better days, being a threat to a family that lived in a world where money solved everything. But he shook his head and told me it wasn't just that. He said his sister didn't believe someone from my background could handle the pressure of their lifestyle, the expectations, the social circles, the family name. Hearing that made something inside me ache, because part of me wondered if she was right. What did I know about rich people dinners, charity events, designer clothes, quiet, unwritten rules, all those things that made their world feel polished and far away? I told him I didn't want to be a burden, and he turned toward me so quickly it startled me. "You're not a burden," he said, his voice firm in a way I rarely heard. "I want you with me. I'm choosing you, not them." His words were warm, but they carried a heavy truth I couldn't ignore. Choosing me meant going against his family, and families like his didn't take rebellion lightly. I looked at him for a long moment, trying to understand why someone raised in comfort would fight this hard for someone raised on struggle. And before I could stop myself, I asked him the question that had been echoing in my mind since the moment his sister walked in. "Are you sure I'm worth all this?" He froze, his expression shifting into something almost hurt, and he cupped my hands gently, telling me I was worth more than anything he had ever been given. His sincerity made my eyes sting, but it didn't erase the fear growing inside me. He didn't notice the way I looked down, the way my thoughts tangled themselves into knots I couldn't loosen, because just then his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and his face tightened, and without him saying a word, I knew who it was. His sister had already started, and whatever she had sent wasn't good. He stared at his phone for a long second, his thumb hovering over the screen like he wasn't sure whether to open the message or throw the phone away. And the hesitation alone told me everything I needed to know. Whatever his sister had sent wasn't just rude or dramatic. It was something meant to create distance, something meant to shake the fragile balance we were trying to hold on to. When he finally opened it, his face tightened even more, his jaw working the way it did when he was holding back anger, and a cold feeling crawled through my chest as I asked him what she said. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned the phone slightly so I could see the message myself. It wasn't long, but it was sharp enough to cut through every bit of calm I had left. She wrote, "If you don't come home now, Dad will assume this girl is already controlling you. You're embarrassing yourself and embarrassing us." Below that was a second message, one she probably sent too quickly to think about how cruel it sounded. "Tell her to stay in her world. She doesn't fit." My breath caught, the words blurring for a second, because I felt something inside me sink in a way I couldn't describe. It wasn't just judgment, it was dismissal, rejection. A door slammed in my face before I even had the chance to knock. He started typing a reply, angry and fast, but I reached out and touched his hand to stop him. I didn't want him fighting with his family for me in text messages sent out of rage. That never ended well. He looked at me, confused, maybe hurt that I didn't want him defending us. But the truth was I didn't want to become the reason his home turned into a battlefield. I told him to take a breath, to think, to not let his sister push him into making decisions through anger. But he shook his head and said he wasn't letting anyone talk about me like that, not even his own family. Still, I could see the storm in his eyes, the kind that comes when your heart is divided between love and loyalty, between the life you grew up in and the life you choose. Before he could type another word, his phone buzzed again. This time it was his father. One line, "Come home. Now." No greeting, no explanation, just an order. I saw his shoulders drop, not in defeat, but in frustration, the kind that comes from being pulled in two directions until something inside you aches. He looked at me with this tired expression that made my chest tighten, and he whispered that he didn't want to go, not like this, not when things were already so heavy between us. But I gently told him that maybe he should, not because I wanted him to leave me, but because running away from his family now would only make them hate me more. He searched my face like he was trying to see if I was secretly breaking inside, and maybe I was, but I kept my voice steady because I needed him to know I wasn't weak, even if my heart felt like it was cracking a little. Finally, he nodded slowly, agreeing only because I asked him to, and said he would go talk to them and come back to me later. He squeezed my hand before standing up, his fingers lingering like he was afraid to let go. And right before he walked out, he whispered, "Don't think for a second that they can scare me away." I watched him leave, feeling both proud and terrified, because I knew this wasn't the end. His family wasn't done, and neither was the storm they were preparing. And as the door closed behind him, I realized something even more frightening. This was the first time I would face my doubts without him sitting beside me. The cafe suddenly felt emptier, colder, as if his absence had taken the warmth out of the room along with his presence. I sat there, my hands clasped tightly around my cup, trying to steady my breathing, but the echo of his sister's words and his father's abrupt message still rattled inside my chest. People whispered, not loudly, but enough that I could hear fragments. "Who is she? Does he really like her? She doesn't belong here." Every word felt like another layer of weight pressing down on me, a reminder that the gap between our worlds wasn't just money. It was expectations, history, and every invisible rule that kept people like me out. I tried to focus on the steam rising from my drink, tracing its twists and turns, trying to find comfort in something ordinary, but it was impossible. My mind kept replaying his protective stance, the way he had stood up to his sister, the way his hand had held mine, and I realized with a mix of fear and hope that I had never met anyone willing to fight for me like that. And yet, the thought of the storm I was about to face alone without him by my side made my stomach churn. Minutes passed like hours until I noticed the waiter glancing at me, perhaps sensing my unease, perhaps curious about the tension lingering in the air. I forced a polite smile and asked for a refill, needing something to do, something to distract me from thinking about what the rest of the day would bring. As I waited, I remembered the nights I had spent working multiple jobs, saving every cent, and wondering if life would ever give me a chance to be seen as more than my circumstances. And here I was, sitting in a world that had always felt untouchable, judged not for who I was, but for where I came from. I realized I had two choices: shrink, hide, and retreat, or stand tall and face the fear, just like he had stood for me. But even as I tried to convince myself, a tiny voice in my head whispered doubt. Was I really ready for this fight? Was love enough to bridge the gap between someone who grew up counting pennies and someone born into silk sheets and golden spoons? I took a deep breath and looked at the door he had left through, imagining him walking through the corridors of his family home, facing questions, whispers, and judgment I could only imagine. I wished I could be there beside him to ease his burden, but I also knew that my own test was beginning, the test of whether I could survive in a place where every glance reminded me I didn't belong. And just as I let my thoughts spiral, the cafe door opened again, and I froze, my heart jumping, because I wasn't sure if it was someone coming to offer comfort or someone coming to remind me just how fragile my place in this world really was. The door opened slowly, and my heart skipped in a way that felt like it had a mind of its own. I looked up, expecting maybe another customer, a waiter, anything ordinary, but it wasn't ordinary. It was his sister again. She walked in like she owned the room, scanning every face until her eyes locked on mine. The air seemed to thicken, and my chest tightened, as though the space between us carried all the tension in the world. She didn't speak at first, just studied me, her lips pressed in that tight line that never promised kindness. I felt exposed, small, and all the lessons I had learned about humility and keeping my place in the world came rushing back. But then something inside me stirred, some part that had survived every struggle, every hardship, every night I had gone to bed wishing for a better life. I straightened in my chair, holding onto the small thread of courage I had, and gave her a steady look. She tilted her head slightly, clearly assessing if I had the courage to stand my ground. And I realized in that moment that this wasn't just about love. It was about proving to myself that I belonged in any world I chose, not just the one I was born into. He wasn't here, and that made it even harder. But I drew strength from the warmth of his hand, still lingering in my memory. The promise in his eyes that I was worth standing up for. She finally spoke, her voice low and deliberate. "You think you can just walk into our lives and change everything?" I swallowed hard, forcing calm into my voice as I told her, "I'm not trying to change anything. I'm just trying to be myself. And I want him to see that I deserve his love, no matter what you think." Her lips twitched, maybe with amusement, maybe with disbelief. She leaned closer, and the words that came out made my stomach drop. "This isn't just about love. It's about family. And families like ours don't let outsiders in." I felt my hands tighten around my cup, knuckles white, and yet I didn't look away. I couldn't. If I did, it would be like giving up before the battle even started. I tried to steady my breath, tried to remind myself that I had survived worse, that I had fought through hunger, poverty, and doubt to get here. And just as she seemed about to say something more cutting, the cafe door opened a third time. My head turned sharply, and I froze because the figure in the doorway was unexpected. Not a family member, not a stranger, but someone who could change the tension in the room in an instant. Their presence alone made me realize that today wasn't just a test of love. It was the beginning of a series of choices and confrontations that could either break me or make me stronger than I had ever imagined. I didn't know what would happen next, but I felt every pulse in my body screaming that nothing about this day would ever be ordinary again. The figure in the doorway froze the room for a heartbeat, and I could feel the cafe holding its breath along with me. It wasn't a family member, not someone I knew, but someone from his circle, a friend, or perhaps a distant cousin, someone whose presence carried authority, even without words. They walked in with calm confidence, scanning the room until their eyes settled on his sister, and immediately the air shifted. She straightened, her smirk replaced by a flicker of unease, as though she realized she was no longer the one holding the power. I clutched my cup tighter, my hands trembling just slightly, because I knew I had stepped into a world of invisible rules and silent judgments. And now I was witnessing the very walls of that world bend, ever so slightly, in ways I hadn't expected. He still wasn't back, and every second without him made my heart beat faster. But seeing this figure gave me a strange sense of hope. The thought that maybe not everyone in his world would judge me the way his sister had. She opened her mouth, perhaps to speak, to assert her dominance again. But the newcomer's gaze silenced her before a word could leave. I watched the tension stretch and twist between them, felt the weight of the silent struggle, and realized that today wasn't just about proving my worth to his family. It was about surviving in a world that had never seen me before, about standing in a room where every glance was a test and every whisper a challenge. I thought of all the nights I had dreamed of love that could bridge worlds, and now I was living it, with fear and hope tangled together. As the newcomer stepped closer to the table, my mind raced. Would they help? Would they judge me too? I felt exposed, raw, and unprepared. Yet a small fire ignited inside me, because for the first time, someone in his world seemed neutral, someone who might see me not as a poor girl, but as a person. Just as the newcomer opened their mouth to speak, the cafe door swung open again, and I realized with a cold shock that today wasn't over, not by a long shot. Every step, every glance, every whisper was leading to something bigger, something I couldn't yet understand. And in that moment, as the air grew thick with tension and expectation, I felt the fragile line between fear and courage tremble beneath me, knowing that the next words spoken could change everything. The room seemed to shrink around me, the steam from my cup rising like a curtain hiding the next scene. And I realized I had no choice but to face whatever came next alone until he returned. And then, just when I thought I might gather the courage to speak, I heard the faint click of heels behind me, and I knew it was him. He walked in quietly at first, almost like he didn't want to disturb the tension that had built up while he was gone. But the moment our eyes met, I felt a jolt of relief and fear all at once. Relief because he was here, because the weight on my chest lightened slightly with his presence, and fear because I knew he was about to step into the storm his sister had started. He moved to my side, sliding into the chair across from me, and without saying anything, he reached for my hand, that same steady warmth that had anchored me since the moment we met. I grasped it tightly, holding on as if he were my lifeline, and in that grasp, I felt a mixture of love, protection, and unspoken promise. He glanced around the cafe, eyes soft but sharp, like he was reading the room, measuring every glance and whisper directed at us. Then his sister opened her mouth, ready to continue the attack, but he didn't flinch. He looked at her calmly and said, "Enough. Whatever doubts you have about her, they're yours. I decide who I choose." His words weren't loud, but they carried weight, and I could feel the air shift again, this time in our favor. I looked at him, heart pounding, overwhelmed by both pride and fear, and whispered, "You can't imagine what this means to me." He squeezed my hand and smiled faintly, but there was a tension in his jaw, a quiet warning that this wouldn't be easy. She didn't answer, just stared, lips pressed tight. Then finally, slowly, she sat down at another table, refusing to make eye contact with either of us, as if conceding only a small victory. I exhaled, but the calm was temporary. I knew this family's disapproval wasn't going to vanish overnight, that the whispers, the messages, and the judgment would continue, trying to test me, test us, test the strength of our bond. He leaned closer and whispered that no matter what happened, he wanted me with him, not just for today, but for every day that followed. His words warmed me, but fear still gnawed at my heart, because love alone couldn't shield me from the eyes and voices of a world that had never truly accepted me. I sipped my drink, letting the warmth settle, trying to imagine myself stronger, braver, deserving of this place and his love, while knowing that the day was far from over. And as we sat there, fingers intertwined, the cafe door opened once more, and I realized that someone else had arrived, someone whose presence could tip the balance further, for better or worse. And I braced myself, knowing that the next moment would challenge everything I thought I knew about courage, love, and the invisible walls between our worlds. The cafe door swung open, and my heart jumped, sensing the weight of someone else entering, someone whose presence carried authority and curiosity all at once. I turned slowly, trying to make sense of who it could be, and my eyes landed on a woman I didn't recognize, tall, poised, with an air that demanded attention without words. She scanned the room, pausing only for a heartbeat on his sister, whose smug expression faltered slightly under the stranger's gaze. My fingers tightened around his hand as I realized that this newcomer was someone important in his family or social circle, someone whose opinion could tip the balance of power in ways I couldn't yet understand. He noticed my unease and whispered that she was a family friend, someone who had known his parents for years, someone whose judgment mattered in subtle, unspoken ways. My stomach knotted because the thought of being scrutinized again, of having my worth measured by another stranger's eyes, was almost too much to bear. She approached slowly, her gaze sweeping over the table, landing finally on me. I forced a calm, polite smile, the one I had practiced for situations like this, hoping it would be enough to survive the first few seconds of assessment. She paused, studying me as if she were reading every line of my face, every curve of my hands, every nuance of my posture. Then, without a word, she leaned slightly toward him and whispered something barely audible, but I caught enough, a warning, a question, something that hinted she already sensed the tension, the unseen battle between worlds, between his sister's disapproval and his choice to be with me. He nodded subtly in response, his jaw tightening, but his hand never left mine. I felt the warmth of his reassurance, but also the pressure of the moment, knowing that every second mattered, that every glance and every word could shift the fragile ground we were standing on. I looked back at the woman, trying to project confidence, but I couldn't ignore the rising fear inside me. This was a world so different from my own, filled with unspoken rules, silent tests, and expectations I had never trained for. She finally straightened, her eyes narrowing slightly, and spoke, her voice calm but sharp. "You're the girl he's chosen." Her words weren't accusatory, but they carried weight, and in that moment I felt the room tilt, the invisible walls between his world and mine pressing closer, testing my courage. I met her gaze, holding it as firmly as I could, and whispered, almost to myself. I hope I can be enough. The woman's lips curved faintly, not a smile, not an approval, but a small acknowledgement that she had noticed my strength. Just then, his sister shifted in her seat, restless, as if she hadn't yet decided to retreat fully. I realized with a sinking feeling that today was far from over, that the real challenges had only just begun, and that surviving this day would take every ounce of courage, every bit of patience, and every thread of love I had ever known. And as I sat there, gripping his hand and bracing for what would come next, I felt the quiet truth settle in. Love could bridge worlds, but it would demand sacrifices I hadn't yet imagined. The tension in the cafe didn't ease, even after the newcomer's brief acknowledgement. His sister shifted in her seat constantly, tapping her fingers lightly on the table, her eyes darting between me and him, as if calculating exactly how far she could push before I broke. I gripped his hand tighter, feeling the warmth of his reassurance, but my chest still ached from the weight of judgment pressing down on me from every angle. He whispered that she would likely continue testing me, that his family had habits and expectations I would have to navigate if I wanted to be part of his life. And I swallowed hard, knowing he was right. Every part of me wanted to retreat, to hide in the shadows, and pretend none of this mattered. But I also knew that backing down now would mean letting go of something I had fought for my entire life, the chance to love and be loved without fear. I looked around the cafe, noticing the curious stares of strangers who didn't understand a word of what had passed, yet still sensed the tension, the invisible storm surrounding our table. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts, and remembered all the nights I had worked, sacrificed, and endured, believing that one day something better would come. This was that moment, the proof that I had survived, that I could stand even when the world tried to knock me down. He leaned toward me, brushing a strand of hair from my face, and whispered that he was proud of me, that he had never seen anyone handle pressure the way I did, and that no one could take away what we shared. His words were like a lifeline, steadying me, giving me courage to face the next challenge. But just as I allowed myself a brief moment of relief, his sister stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, and I felt the air tighten once more. She looked at me, eyes narrowing, and said, "This isn't over, not by a long shot." My stomach churned, because I knew she meant every word. I had stepped into a world that didn't welcome me, and now I had to prove every single day that I belonged. He held my hand again, firm and steady, and whispered that we would face it together. I wanted to believe him fully, but the fear lingered, sharp and real. And then, just as we were about to take a breath, the newcomer cleared her throat and spoke again, her tone measured, almost kind, but her words carried weight. "I think she may be stronger than any of us expected." My chest lifted slightly at her acknowledgement, but the tension didn't fade. I realized that love, courage, and strength might not be enough. Today had proven that the world he came from had its own rules, and I was just beginning to learn how to survive them. And as I watched his sister fume silently at the corner of the table, I knew the next steps would define whether I could endure the invisible battles of a life I had only just entered. The cafe door opened once more, and I flinched slightly, expecting someone who might judge me, someone who might tilt the fragile balance we were holding. But instead, it was a familiar face, one of his closest friends, a calm presence with eyes that seemed to understand without asking. Relief washed over me, though it mingled with anxiety, because I knew his friend's opinion mattered in subtle ways. The circles he moved in were layered with influence and expectations, and this friend had always been a silent observer of family tensions. He approached our table with measured steps, nodding politely to his sister, who scowled back at him, clearly annoyed by someone else entering and potentially diffusing the power she tried to assert. I could feel him tense slightly as he greeted his friend, and I realized that even allies in this world carried their own subtle judgments, their own opinions that could shift dynamics with just a glance. I tried to sit up straighter, to project calm, to prove to everyone that I wasn't just a poor girl trying to survive in a world that had never wanted me. His friend looked at me directly, not with judgment, but with curiosity, and I felt exposed, yet strangely seen. He said nothing at first, simply studied me, his silence carrying weight heavier than any words. I shifted in my seat, feeling the tension stretch between all of us, and whispered to him that I was scared, that I wasn't sure I could withstand the scrutiny. He gave me a small, reassuring smile, the kind that told me he believed in my strength, even if the room didn't. My heart fluttered slightly, the comfort fleeting, because his sister still sat there, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp and calculating. Then he spoke quietly to her, mediating, trying to calm the atmosphere without taking sides. And I watched the delicate balance of power unfold, realizing how little I knew about navigating these invisible rules. He glanced at me again, squeezing my hand gently, and whispered, "Stay strong, just for a little longer. We're not done yet." His words were a lifeline, but I couldn't shake the fear that each step we took together in this world carried risks I hadn't imagined. Just when I thought I could breathe a little, the waiter approached, nervously clearing his throat, and handed him a note slipped under the table, a note from his parents. I didn't know what it said, but the moment he opened it, his eyes darkened, and I felt the chill return, the looming reminder that love in this world would never be simple. And as he folded the note, looking at me with a mix of determination and worry, I realized that today had only just begun testing us, and the challenges weren't slowing down. He unfolded the note slowly, his fingers trembling slightly despite the calm he tried to project, and my stomach sank, knowing that whatever it contained wasn't good. The words were brief, formal, and cold. His parents, reminding him of responsibilities, family expectations, and subtly warning him against pursuing a relationship with someone from a different background. The message didn't just carry disapproval, it carried pressure, the kind that could crush decisions, dreams, and hearts alike. I felt my hands tighten around my cup, nails digging in as I tried to steady myself, wishing I could disappear, wishing I could hide from the weight of a world that didn't want me. He glanced at me, eyes soft but heavy with conflict, and whispered that he wasn't going to let their words dictate his heart, that he wanted to fight for us, for what we had started, even if it meant going against everyone who had raised him. I wanted to believe him fully, to let that hope lift me. But the truth of the situation pressed down like a stone on my chest. Their world was organized, meticulous, and judgmental. My world had been survival and struggle. Bringing them together wasn't just complicated, it was dangerous in ways I hadn't anticipated. I thought about every glance, every whisper, every judgment passed in the cafe, and I realized that stepping into his life wasn't just about love. It was about endurance, strategy, and courage I wasn't sure I had. He reached for my hand again, his thumb brushing over mine, and said, "We'll face it together. No one can take what we have unless we let them." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, but my mind raced with fears of rejection, of being seen as inadequate, of being too small, too poor, too different for a family that had never walked a day in my shoes. His sister watched silently, arms crossed, smirk fading into something harder, like a challenge she was waiting for me to fail. Just when I thought I could calm my thoughts, a soft voice behind us spoke, catching both our attention. The newcomer family friend had returned, now speaking directly to me for the first time, her tone calm, firm, almost approving. She said, "If you want to stay in his life, you'll need more than courage. You'll need patience, strength, and the ability to withstand a world that wasn't built for you." Her words stung, but they also sparked something I hadn't felt before, a recognition that my fight wasn't just against judgment. It was against the fear I carried inside myself. I drew in a deep breath, feeling the weight of his hand in mine, the quiet eyes of his sister still watching, and the mysterious acknowledgement from his friend. And I realized that today was not just testing love. It was testing everything I had ever known about myself. And just as I steadied my resolve, the cafe door opened once again, and I knew, with a tightening in my chest, that whatever arrived next would escalate the test, bringing new challenges that would demand all of my courage, my patience, and the fragile hope I clung to. The cafe door opened once more, and this time it wasn't just a casual entrance. It was deliberate enough to make everyone turn their heads. I felt my chest tighten instantly, bracing myself for the possibility that it was someone who would tip the delicate balance even further. And then I saw him, his father. Tall, stern, with an expression that seemed carved from marble. He scanned the room with eyes that missed nothing, finally landing on me with a look that made my stomach drop. His presence carried authority, the kind that didn't need words to remind everyone of his power. And I realized in that moment that surviving this encounter would require more than courage. It would require tact, composure, and a strength I wasn't sure I had. My hands clenched around my cup, knuckles white, as he approached our table, his steps measured, deliberate, leaving a quiet tension in his wake. My heart raced, not from anticipation of love, but from the weight of judgment, expectation, and unspoken questions that I felt like I couldn't answer. He stopped just short of our table, eyes fixed on me, and spoke slowly, carefully, each word deliberate. I've been hearing a lot about you. I want to understand why you're here." I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady despite the trembling inside, and told him simply that I was in love with his son, and that I hoped he could see that my intentions were genuine. His gaze didn't soften. If anything, it intensified, scanning my face as though trying to decide if I was worthy, if I was strong enough to withstand his family's scrutiny. I felt my heart pound in my chest as every memory of struggle, poverty, and perseverance flashed before me. Every night I had worked multiple jobs. Every moment I had learned to survive and to stand tall despite feeling small. I realized that this was more than a confrontation. It was a test, a silent question of whether someone like me could exist in their world without breaking. His father's lips pressed into a thin line, and the room went quiet around us. The only sounds my shallow breathing and the faint hum of the cafe. After a long pause, he said, "I will be watching. Actions matter more than words." And with that, he turned and walked toward the door, leaving a silence heavier than any sentence could carry. I exhaled slowly, leaning back in my chair, feeling the weight of his gaze still lingering on me. He came back to my side, gripping my hand tightly, whispering that we had survived the hardest part for now. But even as he spoke, I knew the real challenges were just beginning. And as I looked at the cafe around me, the empty chairs, the curious eyes, and the lingering tension, I understood that surviving love in his world would demand every ounce of courage I had, and that nothing about this day would ever be ordinary again. The cafe settled into a fragile quiet after his father left, but I could feel the tension lingering, like smoke that refuses to dissipate. I sat there, fingers intertwined with his, trying to steady my racing heart. But every glance from his sister reminded me that this day was far from over. She had returned to her seat, arms crossed, lips pressed tight, and her eyes never left me, studying, judging, calculating how much I could endure before faltering. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that fear had never defined me, and that surviving hardship had been a constant in my life long before I met him. I remembered all the nights I had worked multiple jobs, all the mornings I had walked to work with my worn shoes and tired body, and I realized that those experiences had prepared me in ways I hadn't recognized. I could endure judgment, whispers, and scrutiny. He leaned closer, his hand still warm and steady, whispering that he was proud of me, that I had held my ground through a storm I hadn't even expected. And I felt a small spark of courage flicker inside me. But I knew the day wasn't over. The final test had yet to come. Just then, the cafe door opened again, and I froze, my pulse jumping. This time, it was his mother. The air seemed to shift immediately, thickening with an invisible weight that pressed down on me. Her eyes scanned the room, and when they landed on me, I felt exposed, vulnerable, every flaw, every insecurity magnified under her gaze. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply observed, her silence more powerful than any words could be. I gripped his hand tightly, leaning slightly toward him, searching for reassurance, and he whispered that we could face this together, that he believed in me, and that no matter what, he chose me. Her Her presence alone reminded me that love wasn't enough in this world. Acceptance, patience, and unyielding courage were equally necessary. I held her gaze as firmly as I could, refusing to shrink back despite the fear that threatened to paralyze me. Minutes felt like hours as we sat in tense silence, me silently asking whether I had the strength to endure, him silently supporting me, and his sister watching, waiting for me to falter. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but cold. "I will be observing. Do not disappoint us." Every word landed like a stone, heavy and unrelenting. I exhaled slowly, swallowing my fear, and whispered to him that I was ready, that I would try, that I wouldn't break, even if this world tried to bend me. And as the air remained thick with expectation, I realized that today had tested everything: love, courage, patience, and resilience, and that the final moments of this day would push me to my limits, forcing me to confront the reality of entering a world I had never known and proving that I belonged. The cafe seemed to shrink around us, the walls closing in with every glance, every judgment, every whisper that had surrounded me since the moment I stepped inside. His mother's gaze was sharp, unwavering, and I could feel the weight of her scrutiny pressing against me like an invisible barrier I had to break through. I gripped his hand tightly, finding comfort in his steady warmth, and whispered that I was scared. But he shook his head gently, brushing my fingers with his thumb and reminding me that courage wasn't the absence of fear, only the choice to move forward despite it. I looked at him, my heart pounding, and realized that love alone hadn't brought me here. It was every struggle, every sacrifice, every night I had endured alone that had prepared me for this moment. His sister still watched, arms crossed, lips pressed tight, clearly waiting for me to falter, to prove that I didn't belong. And then, just as the tension became unbearable, his mother spoke again, softer this time, almost like a test rather than a judgment. "If you are to be part of this family, you must understand that love is not enough. You must learn, adapt, and endure." I nodded, swallowing hard, the words settling heavily in my chest. But I also felt a spark ignite, a realization that I had survived worse, that I had fought for every step I had ever taken, and that I could endure this too. He leaned closer, whispering that we were in this together, and the strength in his voice gave me the courage to meet her eyes without flinching. I straightened in my chair, lifted my chin, and told her calmly but firmly that I was willing to try, that I loved her son, and that I would not shrink in the face of challenge. There was a long silence, broken only by the soft hum of the cafe, and I could feel the subtle shift, the tiniest acknowledgement of respect, not from words, but from presence, from the understanding that I had stood tall when everyone expected me to cower. His mother finally gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible, but enough to remind me that the battle was not over. Yet a bridge had been formed, fragile but real. His sister scowled, muttering something under her breath, but she no longer carried the same sharp edge, and I felt the tiniest bit of relief. He squeezed my hand, eyes glimmering with pride and relief, and whispered, "You did it. Today we survived together." I exhaled, letting the tension ease slightly. But deep inside, I knew that the journey was far from over. This day had tested love, courage, patience, and resilience in ways I could never have imagined. And it had shown me that belonging in his world would require more than just love. It would require every ounce of strength I had ever possessed. And as we sat there, hands intertwined, hearts racing, and the cafe slowly returning to normal around us, I realized that we had survived the first storm. But the next challenges were already waiting, ready to test the limits of love, class, and family in ways I was only beginning to understand.